So, welcome to another episode of Coming to Your Senses, where we talk about navigating the labyrinth of the mind and emerging victorious. And today, my guest is Marilyn Devonish, and she is a woman of many talents, including being a writer and a speaker. And she's multidisciplined therapist and coach, and in my view, an all-round explorer of life, and looks into so many different things. And that's one of the reasons why I invited her to be a guest on the podcast today. So welcome to the podcast, Marilyn.
Oh, thank you so much, Jules, for the invitation. Delighted to be here and very excited to see where this conversation goes.
Yeah, me too. I've been sitting here going through stuff, thinking about you and how long I've known you, where I've known you from, how we've interacted in very different ways over the years, and thinking I genuinely have no idea where this conversation is going to go because there's so many possibilities. I called this podcast Coming to Your Senses because I think that there's been many points in my life where I have either had a great big nudge or a huge shove or kind of a slap around the face, metaphorically, that has brought me to my senses, that has woken me up in many contexts. And I think that that's what happens for many of us on a day-to-day basis sometimes. But I'm curious as to if there was a moment or if there's a specific moment where you came to your senses and where and what that led you to in your life.
Well, it's interesting. Just as soon as you said that, I thought of a particular instance, but it took a couple of years. But I remember it as though it was yesterday. I was in the office in London. I worked for a publishing company, and I was the last one there because I'm going through the job ads, convinced myself that I'd be happy if I just got a new job. And then this person would see my potential and I could do this and I could do that, not realizing there was one central figure in this whole story. So I'm sitting in the office, I'm going through the job ads. I know, what can I say? And I see one of the competitors for the company that I worked with. They were the biggest company I was a conference producer. So I used to write and produce business conferences and get, industry leaders to come and speak. So the biggest people in our industry were looking for conference managers. And I'm like, oh my God, that could be me. And I heard a voice and it said, wherever you go, there you are. And it was so clear that I actually looked around because it felt like it was inside of me, but it sounded like it came from outside of me. So I sort of started for a bit and I looked around and thought, who the hell said that? Nobody there. And then I was like, wherever you go, there you are. Wherever you go, there you are. Didn't really make much sense to me at all. And this was in around 1997, 1998, maybe a little bit earlier. It was only in the year 2000, once I accidentally, apparently, signed up for personal development training. I'm on the training. And again, I'm thinking about, life and what am I going to do next? And if only this and if only that. And I remembered that moment years before in the office. And I was like, oh gosh, I know what that means. Wherever you go, there you are. So if I'm unhappy inside of myself and I take myself to a new job, I'm going to have the honeymoon period where everything's lovely and I meet new people and it's all great. But essentially, wherever I go, I take that unhappiness and I take that sense of dissatisfaction and I take that sense of, I was blaming other people for not recognizing my skills. And quite frankly, I was the one who was not recognizing my skills. But it doesn't matter. I could take myself to London, New York, Paris, Munich. Everyone talks about pop music. Sorry, I've got a jukebox in my head as well. But I could take myself anywhere. And it would essentially, once the honeymoon period has fallen away, I would still be in the same situation, just different circumstances, different day. So that voice for me was a pivotal wake up, although it took several more years before the message landed and I really got what that meant.
And had you heard a voice like that before? Because I think that many of us hear voices, but they are very much an internal thing. My guess is what you're saying is something that it was very different, because it sounded like there was a clarity to it in the way that you were describing it anyway, that meant that you weren't confusing it with that internal dialogue, those inner critic voice that many of us have.
Nowadays, all the time. That is the voice that goes, really, Marilyn? Come on now. You're trying to kid. But before then, and I was in my 20s then, I probably, and I'm going to say probably because I have no conscious recollection of that. Maybe if I really sat and delved through and I thought about some of the challenging situations, I might go, oh my gosh. But consciously, that was the first time it was like, whoa, who and what was that? I'm suspecting that through some of those things in childhood, etc., it was probably there. Was I listening to it? Could I have recognized it then? Would I have just thought it was kind of the land of make believe? But that was the first time I was consciously aware of it, didn't really know what it was. But now it's like, because it is, you're absolutely right. When I hear that voice, there's no messing about. I know exactly what I need to do, where I need to be. Boom, boom. I don't mess with that voice. If it says stand over there and I'm trying to go over there, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to stand over there and something will unfold. And that has happened to me too many times, both in terms of pretty much saving my life, I believe, when I was in the park one day. That's a whole other story where it told me exactly what to do. And I said, you better be right, because if this doesn't work, we're both gone. We're all goners. So now, absolutely clear. I know it. It's like, let's not mess about. But that was the first time in the, 80s, early 90s, whatever it was, that it would have been the mid 90s. I heard it and was like, okay, that got my attention.
If you've listened to the first episode of Coming to Your Senses, you'll know that in the early 2000s, I experienced a breakdown. I tried different therapies, but it was coaching that truly helped me transform my life. Initially, when I discovered coaching, though, I couldn't afford it. And it was a kind soul who sponsored me not only to have coaching, but also to train and become a coach. And my promise to them was that I would pay it forward. And I've done that in many ways over the years, initially through social media and private Facebook group called Confidence Revolution, and also through Coming to Your Senses, the podcast. But it triggered for me a passion to really want to make and create a secure, supportive space for people to be able to come together and have conversations that transform their lives. So I created the Conscious Conversations community. It's a group where we meet on more than once a month. We have a focused theme which is guided by the community and facilitated by me. There's hundreds of hours of learning and resources and materials to help you transform your life in a like-minded space. Because I get passionate about it and because this was my promise to pay it forward, I'm offering you the opportunity to trial it for £1 for the first month. If that appeals to you, then head to juleswyman.online/conscious conversations offer. juleswyman.online/conscious conversations offer to explore what's available for you through being part of a conscious community. So how do you cultivate something like that? Because I think both of us are coaches. We work in slightly different ways, but I think that I'm almost 100% sure that that's something that you encourage and you help others connect with, listen to, trust. How does one go about that? How do we because I don't think we all necessarily hear it as clearly as a voice. For me, sometimes it's just only word I can ever use is a knowing. I know I just need to go and stand over there. There's no other, I can't give you any other logistical or practical reasons. I just have a move there. And I think we all have that, as I'm sure you think that. But how can we get in touch with it more? How can we listen to it? How can we follow it? How can we trust it? All of those questions.
So one of the this is like a walk down memory lane, because years ago I created a whole workshop about how to tap into and harness your intuition. One of the things I would often do is I call it intuition, because if I sort of go too out there, people are like, what? Inner voice, higher self, all that sort of stuff. So I just say it's probably your intuition. Then I used to break that down and say your inner tutor, inner tuition. It's almost like there's a part of you inside that sees more than your regular day-to-day eyes, and it has a wider view of things, and it also is privy to all of the things that have gone on in your life and even before your life, and therefore it comes with a wealth of knowledge that you, with your little tiny conscious mind, no offense to anyone because I'm talking about myself as well, my conscious mind is tiny. in comparison to everything else. So that's why I say it's pretty small in the grand scheme of things. I believe my intuition has way more knowledge than me in this conscious moment because it's been the keeper of everything. So I often call it that. And then for me, because you mentioned the whole thing about multidisciplinary, etc. When I first did my NLP training in October 2000, I was very upset. There was a questionnaire that you filled in and it said, are you visual? Are you kinesthetic? Are you auditory? Are you AD? And I was a clean line. It was basically balanced in all of them. And I thought, oh my God, I'm nothing, because I didn't quite understand what the test meant. Because then people turn up going, I'm visual, I'm auditory, I'm kinesthetic. And I was a bit like, I was just sheepishly in the back, keeping quiet, because I'm like, I'm nothing. And then as the training progresses, they said, ideally, you want to be fluent in all of those. So in terms of the voice, for me, it's dual. I definitely hear it. I feel it as well, in terms of it's kind of in the kind of solar plexus and a little bit into the heart space. I know for some clients, and sometimes if I'm not really paying attention, it's almost like a tingling around where it's always like, oi, like you get an energetic sort of knock on the head. And it is that I just know this, I'm not going to mess with this. So I'd always say to people, notice what your primary style or modality is. When you have that intuitive nudge, do you see it, hear it, feel it? Just know all of the above. I've met clients who will use their other senses, the olfactory and the gustatory. So I've got a friend who's a clairvoyant, for example, and oftentimes she knows something is afoot. That's not a good turn of phrase in terms of what I'm going to say next, but she knows something's coming in terms of she'll smell something. Lavender, and show particular guides that she work with, they have a particular smell, frankincense, whatever it might be. So I always say to people, number one, listen, which might mean taking a little bit of quiet time, a little bit of space just to breathe and to be. And you're right, I also invite it in. The way I say speak to myself is dear unconscious mind. That's the gateway for everything else. Now, there might be specific times I say, higher self, what do you reckon? But when I say dear unconscious mind, it's almost like if we're in a Marvel movie or something like that, or Avengers, whatever it be, Avengers Assemble, it's like that. That's my kind of gateway command for, let's bring forth all of this stuff. What's going on here? I need a bit of insight. What's the next move? Where do I go from here? So I can put the question out there. Sometimes it will come straight away, because if you've got good rapport going on, things will often happen quickly. And there are other times I put the request out there, crickets, nothing happens in that moment. So I'm going to get on with the rest of my day. But I always say to my clients, once you've put a request out there, or a thought bubble, or whatever you call it, notice what you notice. Because something, it could be someone flicks on the TV, the radio, a podcast, or it's happened to me before. I'm on London Underground, so I've been thinking about something that morning. How do I do this? What can I do to resolve it? Boom, boom, boom. I'm on the Underground. It's one of those where I'm not bombing up, running up the up the left-hand side. And I'm just standing, and I just happen to glance at the poster as I go up the escalator, and it has the exact words, the answer to the thing I'd put out there. So I just say, once you've put it out there, had clarity of thought, go inside, create some quiet space. And if nothing comes immediately, still remain open, notice what you notice. And for me, I've got a little thing that I say to myself, particularly when I started in the beginning: please bring me the information, the insight, the knowledge, the awareness, answer, solution, potential solution, whatever, in a way that is right and healthy and ecological for me. Because my God, I was waking up all hours of the night and in the morning because I've got the answer. This is not good for my health. If I need sleep and you'll wake me up every 5 minutes with a really exciting idea, that's fabulous. But then I'm tired. So, and a friend of mine, we were chatting, saying, "Oh man, Paul, I've got magic shower and this has been going on." And I said, "But I'm waking up all hours of the night." And he said, "Marilyn, what did you ask for?" And then I realized what I'd asked for: insights, inspiration. As soon as you got the answer, bring it to me, boom, 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 boom. But oftentimes that was when I was asleep, because probably that's the time my mouth is shut and I'm most quiet. So it's like, great opportunity. So now it's bring it to me in a way it's right and healthy and ecological for me. And therefore, now the systems are in place to go, this is not a good time for her to have this information. I'll hold it. And then when she wakes up, or when she's doing this, or when she's finished the meeting, or whatever it is, I will bring it forth and I'm going to present it to you. So I'd say to people in a nutshell, make little agreements with yourself. Notice how your physiology works. Figure out what your primary styles are in terms of how you receive information. Give some good, clear instructions, and then let go of the form. Notice what you notice and see what shows up. That was quite a long answer. Sorry about that.
No, I think it was a beautiful answer. And I think there's so much in what you've said. This, one of the things that strikes me, and it's not something I haven't thought about before, but brought back a lovely memory. So years ago, I studied in India a couple of times. And one of the teachers out there, I remember them being asked a question about how do you connect with God, source, whatever the word is that they wanted to use at the time. This particular student was really struggling with this particular meditation. And the guide turned around and very beautifully said, have you got a member of your family that you really get on well with, that you'd love to send them a postcard or a letter right now? And the person's whole face lit up and they went, that's who you talk to. And the person was like, no, but I want to talk to God. And they're like, no, just talk to that relative as if you're sat on a bench with them, because you've already got that established relationship. And I think that's, to me, that's what I'm hearing you describe when you're talking about that. Please help me with some information, make this decision, get some insights, some guidance, is you're talking and asking and requesting in the way that you would do with somebody that you are completely connected with. And I think it is, I often, when I'm asking for things like that, I often say, and put it in a very obvious way so that I can understand it, because I'm not great with symbols. So make it nice and clear and obvious. I think one of the things that I would love, so I've got a wonderful friend who we now jokingly, she has for years said to me, oh, don't start with that woo-woo shit with me. And it's just become this running gag. Now, and if you're listening to this, you know who you are. She now has said, kind of surreptitiously, I'm doing some of that woo-woo stuff. And she's not. She's just doing her life normally, but is being far more directive with things of going, I'm visualizing this happening at a certain time and things happening. What? Because you're well into the woo-woo. But you're also well into the science. And that's one of the things that I'm really drawn to about you, is that there's a wonderful blend of the way that you communicate things, which is about what would be classed as woo-woo or spiritual, but you back up so much of it with science, which I flipping love. So how do you talk about what it is that you do with that blend so that it brings people in?
Do you know, it's going to depend. Number one, it will depend. Number two, there was someone who really helped me with this. Years ago, back in 2003, when I first became a management consultant, I worked in central and local government, leadership development trainer, Prince 2 project manager, running away days, corporate, workshops, leadership development programs, etc. And the way I talked myself into that job and into not doing it full time, because they only employed full-time 5-day-a-week consultants, and I wanted to work part-time whenever I want to work, and I'm going to tell you when I'm working and it's going to fit with my schedule, blah, blah, blah. So of course I had to put a proposition together. One of the things I said is, you're going to get a unique blend and you will get more of me if there is time for me to do the esoteric stuff that I love, because I can then bring that to the table. And they was like, sounds great. So we're in a couple of months in now, and I'm doing my best to be what I call suited and booted, because I've got a business degree. I've got a postgraduate marketing diploma with the Chartered Institute of Marketing. I was studying to be a chartered accountant before I gave it all up to become a hypnotherapist. So that's kind of my background. So I'm now doing my best to be suited and booted and business-like. So I go out on assignment with Andy Jess, has now passed away, but Andy Jess was one of the directors, absolutely fantastic gentleman. And we're sitting in HM Treasury in Horse Guards in London, Treasury Department. And client comes in and they've got a problem with a member of staff and they want me to design an executive coaching program. So Andy Jess says, hi, I'm Andy Jess, the director, and this is Marilyn Devonish. She's the woo-woo one. No, he said, she's the weird one. And I was like, and I sort of gave him that side eye look like, Andy, why would you do that to me? The reason he did it to me is because they'd called me into the office a few weeks before and says, Marilyn, one of the reasons we employed, number one, you've got a great CV, brilliant. But one of the reasons we employed you is you said you're going to bring this whole other side to the table. And we're noticing you're not doing that. You're doing a great job, but you're almost hiding that side. So he outed me in that meeting and said, this is Marilyn, she's the weird one. So the client now says, oh, what does that mean? So I look at Andy, who's clearly given me permission to do that because he's put it on the table front and center. So I said, oh, what I believe Mr. Jess is referring to is I also, as well as being a management consultant and a business graduate, I'm also, and I just went straight in. I said, I'm also a hypnotherapist and I'm an NLP trainer. And I do this thing called timeline therapy and HUNA. And I thought, let's straight out there. You know, the client said, he said, perfect. That's exactly what we're looking for. And so I walked out of that. Number one, I was like, Andy, I love you. Thank you. But that was one of those pivotal moments because it's his company. So he gave me permission to put this in front of their clients. Now, there'll be times, let's say I'm picturing it in my head. I'm at a local, because we used to do a lot of work for local authority. So I'm at a local authority, local government council, for those of you in the United States, in the centre of London. And someone was struggling with something. Now I had said, well, look, just think of it. Have you ever had something that's happened in the past and you've almost brought that baggage into the present and then unpacked it right there? I'm like, oh yeah. I'm talking about timeline therapy. They don't need to know I'm talking about timeline therapy. And there'll be times where, have you ever thought about an event in the future and you've got nervous and anxious about it and it hasn't even happened yet? Now I'm talking about into the future life progression, for example. I don't need to say that. I'm just going to give you an example and an analogy that brings that to life. Now, on this particular occasion, one of the people on the course came up and she says, Marilyn, what you were saying about, bringing baggage from the past or projecting into the future, that really applies to me. I says, look, I've got a cool little process that we could do. I says, come back 15 minutes early from lunch and I'll take you for it. Take about 5 minutes. She's like, oh, cool. I said, it's like it plays with your timeline. She's like, all right. So I get back 20 minutes early just to, so I open the door. Every single delegate is sitting around the table. So I look at my watch and I said, am I late? And they went, no. And I look at the person and to say, I'm so sorry. She went, oh, no, I mentioned it to them at lunch and they all wanted to come. So I'm in this room at a local council taking people up above their timeline just to clear some stuff from the past. And that's probably the only time I've ever done that. But it was, it was so apparent that this person was just about. But normally I'm just going to explain it in the terms and using the language of the person that I am speaking to. I would say 7, 8 times out of 10, someone says, what do you do? And I say, well, next week I might be back and I might be running project management for beginners or finance for non-financial managers or, leadership development or critical thinking and decision making. So they'll let me go through the list of all the workshops and they'll go, no. What else do you do? Because they get that there's something different that is being taught around here, even if I've been completely corporate speak, saying it in the way that it is, but I'm just going to use analogies which fit with that person. If somebody asks me a direct question, of course I'm going to answer it, but it depends where I am and what have you brought me in here to do? That's what I'm going to do, but I still might do it in a more unique way that gets a really fantastic deep result in a matter of minutes. And then people are like, whoa, what's going on here? What's that? And then they're often the ones coming forward and asking, but I'm just going to lead with, how can I phrase this in a way that fits with the world that they reside in, whether that's banking or medicine or whatever it might be.
I love that. And I love that how there's not a script. I think very often we can end up, regardless of what it is that we do, regardless of how we see the world, we can get caught up in a script, which is similar to your baggage of bringing something from the past. And we're so stuck with it that it doesn't matter who we're in front of, we still repeat it and regurgitate it the same way. And that may be our CV of life. That may be our identity of who we think, so when someone says, who are you? And all of a sudden it is this download of not actually who we are or what we are in that moment. It's just this information that I've been collecting, this data that other people have told me. So therefore that's who I am. I am this, or it might be my qualifications, rather than actually being with what is at that moment and communicating at that point. I love that in that interaction. I think one of the things that I'd love to know, because you've already listed some of the things that you do, are you do you get drawn to like one thing at a particular time to interact with or use or share, or is it just I fancy doing that now, so I'm going to do that? Or do you feel like it's kind of out of your hands? Do you think you've got choice with it?
Yeah, I mean, there are some things that just lend themselves to a particular thing. So somebody's saying, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I just don't know what my purpose is and what I'm doing. I'm like, I think you could really benefit from a soul plan reading. It's kind of obvious, you know. Or if somebody's talking about emotional baggage, I'm like, well, timeline therapy, I think might be good for that. Or if somebody says, I just don't know what it is, I've tried everything, depending on where they're at, I might go, well, past life regression could be really great for that. You know, things that happened before you. If it's about the future, next level, future life progression could be amazing. So, and if somebody's saying, oh, my mind, my brain, my memory, I'm foggy, say, oh, photo reading, oh my God, it will blow your mind. Let's read at 25,000 words per minute, and I'll show you how to get through a book in 5 minutes. So sometimes the conversation tells me what I think. And I'd say, one of the things, if I were you and if you were asking me, or, people are asking me, I say, well, my suggestion would be, based on what you've said, I think that would be a great starting point. Now, when I'm with a client in a session, no, I've actually told my clients this, so it's no big deal, because I'm like, oh, they might think I'm like, whatever. They know how I work. There'll be times I will think about, well, always, I think about, okay, what are we going to do next time? So I might finish a session and I make a little note to myself in terms of, and it says next time. And then I just write a little something, but there's always a question mark there. Then I rock up to the client, let's say a week later, because I know they're going to be in a completely different space than when I saw them last time. And something that was a problem last time in the intervening space is not a problem anymore. So then I'm going to go with what's happening. And there'll be times as a client is talking, I'm going to write something down and I put the date and the time next to it. And then I fold my arms like this. So I'm just sitting. And like they'll finish and go, so what do you think? How does that sound? I say, right, now I'm going to pick up my notebook. I'm going to show you something. I said, you can see I haven't written anything down since you've been talking. And I hold up the notepad, and oftentimes before they've said what they've said, I've written it down word for word. I mean, it freaks them out. I mean, it's kind of cool for me as well, but it kind of freaks them out. Or I will think, oh, I had an idea last week when I was really thinking about you. It seemed a bit weird at the time, and then they will say exactly the thing that I thought about a few days ago or a few weeks ago. And I show them the notebook just so, because, you get to a point, people go, you're just making that up, Marilyn. So I'm going to document it so you can see what we're talking about. So it's really in the moment, because I might have an idea that I think I want to do, but then we rock up and it's like, whoa, that's been superseded or something even better. And oftentimes now, unless somebody specifically said, can we do a Huna session? I'm like, yeah, sure. It's going to be a blend of things, because I'm going to listen to what's been presented. And I think, well, actually, it's like, I'm the last person to give analogies about cooking, because I love food, hate cooking, love food, hate cooking, no interest in cooking whatsoever. However, it's like a bit like a recipe where I've got all these ingredients. I'm trained in about 20 different modalities. So I've got all these ingredients in front of me. Client appears, and I've been working with clients online around the world since 2005. It wasn't just in response to the pivot. So a client appears on screen or on the telephone back in the day before me, and then all of those ingredients will start to blend and go, well, that would be great, and that would be great, and that would be great. Now, when I first started out, I used to just one day breakthrough sessions. So turn up in the morning, we go through your entire life, we come up to the end of the day, 5:30, whatever it is, adios, have a nice life, your whole problem is resolved, your life is transformed. And I did that for the first 9 or so years I was in practice. So in that instance, it was, this is how we do a breakthrough session. There's going to be nuances in between that, but essentially the structure is set. What's going on? What's the root cause? How is it impacting your life? What are the prime concerns? Here are the interventions. Let's take you through all the interventions. Clear all of that. Now let's future pace, put a goal in your future timeline, set your future up, off you go. So sometimes it will be structured, but majority of the time, even within that framework, it's like, okay, what's going on? And I know it's going to sound weird, well, maybe not to you, but I hear music. So I might be talking to a client. I'm going to hear either a song or a line or a phrase. And that means, Marilyn, the thing you've just disregarded as being silly, this is the thing you need to do with this particular client. And so I pay attention to that as well. And then I go, oh, this is going to sound completely mad. But so I had a client last week and I said, this might sound like the most bonkers thing you've ever heard. However, this morning when I was thinking about you, it felt like this is what we were going to do. So I explained this whole thing. There's a moment of silence. She said, Marilyn, what you've just said is a visualization that I had at my grandmother's funeral. And I was just like, okay, let's go. Do you know what I mean? But at the time, I could have disregarded that. But then the song came in that was relevant to what we were talking about. And that's my sign, like, tell this client about the thing that you're trying to push to one side because it sounds a little bit silly. So I really go with that. But it is a blend. It's a mixture based on who is in front of me.
I'm kind of smiling and I'm trying not to laugh too much. I used to have, I've only taken it down recently because it was gathering dust, a little witch hanging on my window in my office that was bought for me by a client, a very, very staunch Catholic client. So I thought it was very hilarious that she bought me a witch and would often refer to me as a witch. And she's not the only person in my nearly 20 years now of coaching that will call me a witch or a psychic. And I have said countless times, I'm neither. But when you're quiet enough and listen, you will get, in your instance, you're talking about the visuals or the song, or there's something. And there's been so many times when I've said to a coaching client, I've got this thing about cheddar cheese. I want to ask you about cheddar cheese. It'd be so random that even I'm like, why the hell am I asking this? And I can't, sometimes it is like the words will pop up. Sometimes it is a visual. Sometimes it's something else. What I would like, and I'm going to ask you to explain it because I've got a sneaking suspicion you'll explain it way better than myself. I don't believe that's us specifically being psychic as opposed to actually being tuned in to the grand internet that we all have access to. Lynn McTaggart will call it the field. Some people call it Christ consciousness. Could you explain that? Because I'm pretty sure you'll be able to explain it way better than myself.
Well, just in terms of the way it comes to me, and I'm laughing because my clients are, number one, when I do tarot readings, I'll say, Marilyn, you don't need the cards. I'm sure, but I said, but the cards are a nice gateway in, it just puts the first image in your head. And then, I probably don't look at that card again. I'm on a roll. Like yourself, I've got many, many clients say, well, you're clairvoyant, you're channeling, you're a medium. And don't get me wrong, I have had people's family members come through. There was one I did on Facebook Live once. I had a new deck of cards. They were completely random cards. They were Banksy. There's an artist in the UK, for those who might be abroad, called Banksy. So Banksy, I say he because we believe it's a man, turns up, does these wonderful murals and then disappears. No one ever sees him. And a Banksy can be worth, tens of thousands, millions, etc. So a client sends me these Banksy cards because they're in my group where I do the Tarot Tuesday every month. So I go onto Facebook Live and I say, does anyone want a reading with these cards? I'm trying them out. And somebody called Fran, I say her name because it was public and she was fine with that because it was Facebook Live on my page is public. And someone called Frantonia from America, who I've never met, shows up. So I start doing the reading and I hear this voice. But the voice is telling me to say to Frantonia, I see it even now, it's like the voice goes, the voice is telling me to say things to Frantonia in a way I wouldn't speak to someone that I don't know, and probably in the way I wouldn't speak to a woman, like, hey, baby. I'm like, come on now. So I'm trying to not say these things. In the end, this woman, I'll say pointing because it felt like there's a woman standing, is quite insistent and putting these words in my mouth. I said, Frantonia, I'm so sorry. I wouldn't normally speak to you like this. And then I relay these words and she says, that's Granny Gracie. Now, Granny is her grandmother who's passed, and that's exactly what Granny Gracie used to say. So now Granny Gracie has got the in. She is off. And she's given me all this information. For Antonia's like, oh my God, that's exactly, Granny. And then Granny Gracie starts in on me about why I haven't done this and I really should do this. And blah, blah, blah. It was the weirdest thing ever. Well, not weird, but, for people watching, they must be like, what is going on here? But it's all there. And I've got the video somewhere on my Facebook page. It was a few years ago. So based on that, people say, well, Marilyn, clearly you're a medium, you're a clairvoyant, you're a psychic. And I, like yourself, I say that's not how I identify myself. I've got friends who are clairvoyants and psychics. When I see them work, it feels different to the way that I work. Although if you look at the output, it's probably similar. You could even say the same. The way, and when I was 18 years old, I was studying A-level psychology, and we were studying Piaget, Freud, Maslow, all the classics, let's call it that. We were supposed to be looking at Carl Jung in terms of his official work. Somehow I came across, kind of reading around the subject, this thing called synchronicity. And it just blew my mind as an 18-year-old. And now it's a part of my life. It's part of the fabric of my life for the past 24 years. But back then, it was just such an intriguing concept. But one of the things that Carl Jung talked about is the collective consciousness. The way I perceive the collective consciousness is like a stream of consciousness that runs above our heads. And we can either, sometimes you put your hand up and draw something down, or something gets delivered from the collective conscious, like the zeitgeist. And it just pops in at the right moment. But it's like this constant stream that is above our heads at all times. Sometimes we draw down on it, or it delivers something. And that's always the way I say it feels to me, as I'm in Jung's space of collective consciousness, and I'm either going to draw down something that is connecting me and the person or the group of people that I'm speaking to, or something gets delivered, like the song into my head, for example, the line, the image, the thing I see that I can't get away from, or the feeling that I get. Because sometimes I'll get a feeling like in my shoulder, and I say, is this mine or someone else's? Is this mine, or does this belong to the client that I'm working to? So now I've got clarity. It's not mine. I now know, okay, I need to do this, and then it disappears for me. And then I say to the client, so is there anything, has there been anything with your shoulder? And go, oh my God, yeah. And then I'll suddenly go, oh, it feels much better now. It's that sort of thing. So I call it, it's almost like the collective consciousness that we're all tapped into. There was someone called Esther Hicks, she calls it tune in, turned on, tapped in, however you want to say it. But for me, the kind of the analogy that's always worked for me is the Jung collect. And I would say, look, if Carl Jung were here, that's probably not what he meant by the collective consciousness. But the way that I read it, I'm like, that for me is a perfect explanation of what's happening. And sometimes the portal, the doorway might be wide open and stuff is just coming as 10 to the dozen. And other times you're like Steve Martin in The Man with Two Brains, give me a sign. Any sign? Even though the windows are going up and down, the door is slamming, if you're not in the right headspace, you can be like, anything? But that's the way I kind of describe it. And yes, would be similar to Lynn and the field, etc. I'm sure. And I say I'm sure because there's an event that I MC and have done for the past 6 or 7 years where Lynn McTaggart is one of the speakers, and we've just come back from Canada doing a version of it over there. So I hear her speak a lot. And when she speaks, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I call that. And that's what I call that. Oh, and that's what, so, and there's a lot of, overlap in that as well.
I think that's where one of the things that can trip us up when we're starting to talk about these things, and I know it's definitely something that's tripped me up. For example, the word ego. I can say the word ego and mean one thing. Carl Jung will have a different meaning for it, same as yourself, etc., etc. And I think that very often, that's why I think if we can talk around something a bit more, we can get more of the sense of, you may be describing it in a way that I'm like, yeah, that's totally what I'm talking about, but you'll label it a different word. That doesn't make it right or wrong. It's the experience that we're wanting to be talked to. And I know that very often, both in speaking and also as a coach, the amount of times that someone will go, how did you know that? And it's the realization of, we are so unaware of how much information we give away. And I think because clients in particular, and I'm guessing that you might experience something similar, they're so not used to somebody being present with them to really hearing what they're saying, that we can hear beyond what's being said. So you can pick up on different things, which again then makes it sound like you're psychic, when actually the person's, it's not that they're literally saying something, but there's an essence of something that can go, there's some clues there that piece together that we're able to pull on. So what I would love to know from you, because you have got, I don't know how many hundreds of different qualifications in all those wonderful different modalities. You're obviously an avid learner and loving to pull those ingredients together, even though you're not a cook. You're obviously a cook of life and humans, not in the cannibalistic way. That sounded wrong. That sounded really wrong. Well, what would you say are ways, because it seems to me that the world is in a significant point of change. That's about as much as I can articulate it, because there just seem to be, doesn't matter which area I look at it, whether I want to look at it from a financial or an ecological or just health, or there's so many different things that seem to be being grabbed and thrown up in the air that at the moment it seems quite chaotic. But as is said, out of chaos comes order, hopefully a bit sooner than than it has been at the moment. It feels like clinging on for ages. But what would you say what would be your advice or your guidance to anyone listening or watching, that to help them navigate the chaos that life can be, and certainly seems to me to be at the moment, so that they can be even more aware and have clarity for themselves on a day-to-day basis?
Oh, that's one of life's big questions.
Yeah, just
So
you
I'm
start
going
off
to
at 10.
just start off with 10. I'm going to reach for two platitudes, first of all, because they're sitting on my desk. I'll show you this one first. Hang on, this way.
What does that
So it
say?
says, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. And
Good.
it's by Albert Einstein. And I purchased this, I know what I did, in 1995. I know because I wrote the date on the bottom, because I had it on my desk at work. And so it's like, I can identify this is mine in case anyone tries to run off with it. But in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. I bought this in 1995. Now, I considered suicide in September 2000. So this was 5 years before it got really, really bad. But this used to sit on my desk in the office at work. And when things got really bad, I would remind myself of this fact, that in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. There is going to be something within this moment. Can't see it yet, but with the gift of hindsight, there's going to be something that can come around. The second one is a quote that I've been sharing with my clients and using for myself for many, many years. And it says, for those who don't, so I'm going to read you the long version. So it says, and above all, watch with glittering eyes the whole world around you, because the greatest secrets are always hidden in the most unlikely places. Those who don't believe in the magic will never find it. So this one is from Albert Einstein, and this one, the magic, is from Roald Dahl. And those are two of the things that kind of kept me sane when the whole world around me was crumbling, to the point that I was thinking of ending it all, because it's like, I just do not want to be here. This is not the world that, I have no value to bring to the world, so I may as well just go. So for me, I often say to people, you may not see the value of something, or there's nothing good you can pull from it in the moment. And don't try and force yourself, because that then becomes even more devastating and demoralizing. And it feels completely pointless. But one of the things you can do is, number one, most people I've met, I say, have you ever had any difficult circumstances beyond now, this thing that we're talking about now? Well, yeah, Elton John, you're still standing, you're still here. You've made it this far. So within you, there are strategies and things that you've done to get you through some, again, coming back to, let's say, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, Dickens and that whole thing about dichotomy. You've been through possibly what you felt was a worst of times situational scenario, and somehow you've made it through. Somehow you are still here. How did that happen? Because the strategy that they use then is probably similar, if not the same, that a strategy will help them in the now. And then I said, well, just maybe go back to that time and unpick it a little bit. What were you doing? What were you thinking? What were you feeling? What was the process? And then I said, but that took 10 years. I'm like, great. And with the gift of hindsight, maybe you don't have to wait another 10 years, because now you've built the strategy, you've built that level of resilience, and somewhere inside of you resides the seed of something else. And then I would often say, is there anything you do now that you enjoy? Or is there anything about yourself that you have discovered as a result of those tough times? I haven't yet met anyone who's gone, no. Now, they might go no in the moment without thinking about it, but when they really think about it, they're like, actually, yes. And I could list you some really terrible things that I've gone through, that have happened to me. And if people are looking, going, what? And I have had people, I've been on stage, and somebody had said to me, what do you know? Because I was talking about, mindset, mental health and trauma. what do you know about trauma? So I look around the room and I said, do you really want to know what I know about trauma? And the group went, yeah. I was like, cool. And I said, before I say what I'm going to say, let me tell you that the words that are about to come out of my mouth, I can say them as easily as, I'd like a cup of herbal tea, please, because they don't have a charge for me. But then when I told them about my childhood, I said I was sexually abused from the age of 7 to 17. I didn't even get to finish the rest of the sentence because by now their all minds are all blown away. And they're like, well, sorry, hold on. How could you be the person we see on stage who appears to have nothing ever go wrong in their life? I'm like, really? To what you've just told us, those two things don't now fit together, because it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And then I say to them, the reason I'm so passionate about personal development and the reason I'm sharing these ideas and thoughts and strategies with you is because those are the things that helped me to resolve that and go through that and get beyond that. But if you come to me at the time as a 7-year-old or as a 17-year-old or even a 32-year-old, because I didn't resolve it until I was 32, I would have probably happily punched your lights out and said, you have no idea what we're talking about. So I'd say to them, don't go in too soon, trying to pick it all to pieces, because sometimes it's just too raw. You're in the eye of the storm. That is not the time to necessarily, unless let's say you're in the jungle, you've got to get out in, 0.2 seconds. That's the time. But in day-to-day life, you don't need to pick something to pieces right in the moment, because you maybe even haven't got all the data. You haven't yet got the gift of hindsight and the bigger picture, but go back and look at some of the things you've been through, because within that, there's probably the seed of something. It might not solve what you're going through right now, but what it may do is give you hope. And it will remind you of who you are, what you are capable of, and what you have already been through, and yet you're still here.
I find it fascinating. It's two things that strike me with that. Is one, I find it fascinating how quickly we forget. And so that then when we're faced with a current unsettling situation, we forget the amount of times we've dealt with that kind of shit in the past, and potentially worse, more intense, with less skill set, because we forget that we've learned something from that. Even if that happened again, I would not do it that way. Taking the time to reflect on it and go, okay, well, if I was going to have a do-over, then I would do it this way or that way, or I'd use this or I'd use that. So that's the first thing. I think it's so important. I love that you've reminded us of that collect those times, go back and take the time to think about the tough times and look at what resources you had. What were you thinking during that time? I can't remember all the questions that you asked, but you can hit pause and go back and listen to what Marilyn was saying. That I think it's so important to reflect on that, so that it builds that resilience within us and it builds that reminder within us as well. But I also think that I get it very often, get it myself, of people going, well, it's all right for you. It's like, well, I didn't just wake up like this. I had to had a moment as well where I attempted my own life to take it. And I've spoken about that. I think it's episode 12 on the podcast. I've spoken about that already. And I think it's important to recognize that so often, not always, but so often, the people that are banging the drum, which is basically saying this shit works, is because they've experienced it, and they've experienced it firsthand themselves, the difference that it's made for themselves. And then either because they decided to, or inadvertently, they've ended up sharing it with other people, and they start to recognize the difference that it can make. And I think it's so important to remember that as well. Somebody once said to me, everyone's climbed a ladder to get where they are, but not everyone's was straight and had all the rungs in the right place. Some was barbed and broken and tied together. And it's always been a great visual as a reminder for me, no matter how far I put somebody up that ladder, everyone's had something to climb, and it may not have been easy. So just give them the benefit of the doubt and remind ourselves of that. And just as a final thing, is there anything that we've not spoken about that you would like to share at this point? Or have you got any songs or voices in your head that are saying, say this, do that?
And I guess, we're going to it maybe end where it started for me, because people often say, well, how did you get into this in the first place? I was studying to be a chartered accountant. I was very quiet and very shy, a bit like you're saying you were. I always say, look, I didn't do a Lady Gaga. I wasn't born this way. I learned these skills, you know.
She
So I was
wasn't
very
born that
quiet
way
and very
either.
oh, exactly. No, because she was the one people used to pick on her when she said she was going to be a star, and they would all laugh at her and take the mick, etc. So yeah, absolutely. And so I was very quiet, very shy, lacking in confidence, very low self-esteem. I wouldn't have said the self-esteem because I didn't have the language for that at the time, but I could barely speak to my own family. And I was like that right up until the age of 32. I was terrified of public speaking. And I decide that I'm going to, with my business degree and the marketing and all the rest of it, I decided I was going to be a chartered accountant. That isn't really what I truly wanted to do. I wanted to be a lawyer. However, my older sister, who's very, very bright, very academic, and very outgoing, was already a lawyer. So in my mind, I didn't want there to be a direct comparison between the two, because I'd always sort of, albeit sometimes unconsciously, gone out of my way to do something different so there couldn't be the comparison, because I knew I was nowhere near as smart as she was. So I would have wanted to be a lawyer, but I thought, what's the next best thing that would give me gravitas, is the way that I kind of thought about it. Accountancy. And I actually liked accountancy when I did my business degree. It was one of my favorite topics. I thought, okay, I could do that. So I'm studying to be a chartered accountant, partly because I also think I will not have to talk to people. That I could just be behind my calculator at my desk. Before she started, I was doing the ACCA, and I was like, oh no, to be a half decent accountant, you've got to talk to people. You've got to have conversations with your clients. I'm like, so I decide I'm going to sign up for a communication skills course. That's what I thought. Now, when I was
Right.
doing freelance work, I was organising exhibitions at a place called Earls Court and NEC and Kensington Olympia, that sort of thing. Again, behind the scenes, I'm not the one on stage, speaking to one of the speakers. Oh, that's it. And we somehow got, I talked about stress, and I said, oh, I saw this thing called Reiki, and I was going to go and do a Reiki session. I saw it said about stress. And she said, oh my God, my mum's a Reiki teacher. And she starts talking about all this stuff that is just way over my head. And then I then talked about somehow saying to her, yeah, I think I want to improve my communication skills as well. She went, oh my God, I've got this company we use. They do our trainings. I've been done their training. She gave me their card. So I phoned them on her recommendation, because she has specifically said they can help with communication skills. And they did do a thing around public speaking. Somehow I end up signed up to this full-on practitioner, as it was called, still thinking it's about communication skills. And then the joining instructions arrive, and I open this big box. It was cassette tapes back in the day. And it's like, hypnosis, Huna, timeline therapy? I don't think so. So I pick up the phone and I said, oh, thank you so much for the information. This isn't what I signed up for. How do I send this back? I want a refund. Thankfully, they didn't give me a refund. They did a classic reframe. I said, come to the training. If you don't get massive value, we'll give you a refund at the end. So now I'm hopping mad. I'm steaming, because this was several £1,000s. So I'm like, not only have you got my money, I'm not going to have to spend a week of my time, and I'm right in the middle of my accountancy studies. I spend a week of my time, a couple of months before the exams, because this was in the October, the exams are in the November, December. What a waste. So I go down to London, face like thunder, out the back of the room, head tilted to one side, eyebrow raised, my hand is up in the air every 5 seconds. I'm trying to catch him out. And then I suddenly thought, hold on a minute, if I continue with this for the whole week, they are going to rightly say to me, you didn't play full out, and therefore we're not going to give you a refund. I thought, you're not catching me out with that one. So I thought, I'm going to dive in, both feet, do everything you tell me to do, prove it's a load of old nonsense, and that there is no way you can change someone's life by just speaking to them. This was in October 2000. In the September 2000, I was contemplating suicide. So it was only a couple of weeks between the two. By the end of that, I was like, oh my God, my life is transformed. I'm not going to get a refund. I'm actually going to come back in 3 weeks' time and do the 14-day training. And then the following year, they offered me a job as one of their NLP trainers. So that's how I ended up doing the trainers training in NLP and hypnosis and timeline therapy. Went out to Hawaii a couple of times to study Huna, because that just blew my mind. And then started adding other modalities from there, partly for curiosity for myself, but also because I'm like, this is an amazing world, and I want to have choice in terms of what I can offer to my clients and the modalities that I use. And so, yeah, I do love learning. And that partly is because in my 20s, I was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, and my doctor said there was nothing that they could do for me. The photo reading changed everything after I got over myself and got into personal development, because I'd had they're still on the shelf behind me, the cassette tapes. I left them there for 2 years because I couldn't believe it could be true that you could read at 25,000 words a minute, blah, blah, blah. So when I got into personal development, there's somebody standing before me who said they read 20 to 30 books a month. And I'm like, well, I've got Alzheimer's. I'm going to go back. I've already got this stuff at home. And the rest, as they say, is history. So absolutely, as you were saying earlier, the things that I do and that I'm passionate about, it's not just because I've read about them and they sound interesting. Nothing wrong with that. I love reading, read about stuff, fill your mind. But it's because I live them as well. And I thought, if I want my money back, can do it, and I wasn't even interested, then I started thinking, imagine what would happen if I was working with people who actually wanted to change and transform their life or next level their skills, because it's almost like a continuum. And that is how it all started. So it wasn't intentional, but where we started this conversation with, the things that call you, how do you know? When I stumbled into it and got over myself, as Lynn McTaggart would often say, I was like, I feel that this is what I was born to do. And it just felt so right. So the people around me thinking, oh my gosh, she's been inducted into a cult. When I say I'm giving up my accountancy studies, I'm going to be a hypnotherapist. I only had 3 papers to go and I would have been chartered. For them, it was like, oh my God. For me, it was a no-brainer. And there was such peace inside of me that I'm like, this is it. This is what I was born to do. Help other people to change and transform, for me in rapid time, let's not hang about, but doing it in a way that is deep and lasting and gives people that wonderful ripple effect, where the effect of just one day can ripple throughout their entire lives. So that for me is how it started. It's part of that wonderful archetypal journey where you hear the call, step over the threshold, and I'm trained in archetypes as well, surprise, surprise, but you hear the call, you step over the threshold, and then if you're brave enough to continue on, you eventually return to the kingdom with your gifts. And I have to say, this conversation has been an absolute gift. I have absolutely loved it. And I love the way, Jules, that you weave those threads together. And then out of that comes the next kind of piece of our conversation. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. And in some ways, I can echo back what you've just been said, because, I have got multiple school reports from my primary school that all say, great at speaking. She'll speak to anybody. She'll speak to anyone. She speaks to the teachers and her peers and speaking. Then I can show you in my secondary school ones that are all right, needs to shut up, talks too much. And there is a part of me that, if I could go back and just say, if I could just plant that mentor, the right mentor at the right time, not that I haven't got any regrets about my life at all, that saw that at a much earlier age and went, you can harness this, learn to shut up when you need to shut up, and learn to speak artfully when you can speak artfully. And I will show you both of those. I would have been in like Flynn. But I got there in the end. And, coming to your senses was a voice that kept coming in my head over and over again about 5 years ago. And I thought it was one thing, explored that, didn't sit, and then it disappeared again, and then came again. And then I explored that, didn't fit. And then about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, it came again. I was having a conversation with somebody and I went, oh, and he went, you do realize that's a podcast, don't you? And I was like, yeah, I just got it. And that's how it came out. So I think it's a very similar thing. And I think that we can all, whether it's playing an instrument, whether it's, going exploring something as an engineer, it doesn't matter what it is. But when we're doing something that is so true to our authentic self, I think it can seem very easy from the outside. But I think that's because we're far more in alignment. And that's why we're drawn to watching people do things like sports or musicians, because they're in alignment and they're coming from that point. And I think that's why I connect with you. And as I say, our paths have crossed in many weird ways over the years. And I think that's why I resonate with you, because you're doing what is absolutely the right thing for you. And I'm so grateful that you could gift us this time, because I know your time is very full and very precious. So thank you so much. As I mentioned at the beginning, we'll put all of your details in the show notes so that people can reach out to you. But thank you very much for joining us today, Marilyn.